the Adaptive Capacity Index piece of work. And I think we always talk about the index as this sort of framework of mindset, behavior, culture, and system. But before we jump into that, I thought it'd be interesting just to get a sense of, why and how did you sort of come to develop this particular kind of framework? Because one of the things that interested me when we first spoke, and I read some of your LinkedIn posts, were really around this idea that you had run large organizations and you knew about the ability of the way in which people work together to make or break initiatives and projects. That seemed to be the thing that underpinned your work. So I was just interested, maybe the index itself is a thing, but how did that thing come to be? How did you actually make your way to making that thing?
Yeah. Honestly, I wish I could. I wish I did. It's kind of stolen. I mean, it's not stolen, it's attributed, but it comes out of the work of a guy called Ken Wilber. And Ken Wilber is an American philosopher, and he's written extensively about human development, both individuals as well as the collective. And this 4-quadrant framework is his. And it came out of a piece of work that he did over many years, where he kept on running into different schools of thought, or later philosophers or scientists or thinkers or researchers who would inevitably end up kind of countering the previous one. So everyone was kind of fighting each other for who was right. And this has gone on, of course, for centuries. And it's gone on through the annals of philosophy, through the annals of science. And constantly people are kind of having these debates and arguments about, well, who's right about whatever, reality, love, goodness, truth, beauty, all of these sorts of things. And what he started to do is to recognize that there were a whole bunch of people, that were kind of talking about very similar things, but from slightly different perspectives. And he also wanted a way to kind of put everything on the table at the same time. He wanted to have a place for everything to live and in relation to each other. And that's where the 4-quadrant thing came from. And so what he realized was that there were people who did work and or did thinking about individuals. And then there were people who did work or did thinking about the collective or the group. And so that formed his top and bottom. And so the top bit is about the individual, and the bottom bit is about the collective or the team or the organization. And so the top of your cross there, that's about the individual, and the bottom is about the collective.
Right.
And the left and the right also are about things. And so on the right-hand side is what's tangible or obvious. So that's the behavior and system piece. And what's on the left-hand side is about what's intangible or subtle or not so easily measured. And that's the intangible. And that's the mindset and the culture piece. And so he didn't call them mindset, behavior, culture, and system. That's something that I developed. He didn't talk about particularly the aspects that I've developed within them, but the overarching framework is his. And it's called in his thinking AQAL, all quadrants, all levels, AQAL for short. And there's a whole bunch of people who have developed this in their own ways, and so that's the basis of this foundation for me.
So that's really interesting. I think this idea of putting everything on the table and being able to talk about it from these different perspectives is very common again to other types of approaches that I come across in operations research and so on. And it is, in fact, I think just this morning, there was a LinkedIn post that I was reading that talked about how meetings could be restructured to have different people in there. And my reaction to that was, I don't think it's a question of structure. It's a question of making meetings work better, regardless of who's in there. It's about how do you actually get this information on the table and engage with it. So the AQual is all, I got that right, all levels. What's AQ? What's
All quadrants.
All quadrants.
So, and this is the quadrant piece. And so what Wilber also does is he then picks up some other people's work. And so it's work of, say, Spiral Dynamics or Loevinger, which is talking about hierarchical development. And so what he'd say is, well, there's 4 quadrants at this level, but then there's another level of 4 quadrants, and there's another level of 4 quadrants, and there's another level of 4 quadrants. And so it's a 3-dimensional kind of space that gets created. It's not just flat.
Yeah.
And so that's the AL piece. All levels is this idea of hierarchical complexity of reality. There's hierarchical complexity in biology, for instance, right? And so you have cells, and then you have organs, and you have tissues, and then you have organisms, and it builds in complexity. And so this is a similar kind of idea. And there's many different disciplines and ways of understanding the world that do the same thing, that are built up hierarchically in terms of complexity. So that's what that's about.
So the way that I guess would see that then is you have your quadrant was almost an axis. You'd have multiple levels of the quadrant that way. And then along that, you have the individual and the collective and the tangible and the intangible, with the mindset, behavior, culture, and systems part of it. So this is kind of there's a systems thinking kind of aspect this as well, in terms of, I guess there are things you can talk about at this level that don't exist at the level below it.
That's correct.
Obviously, the system example is you can have atoms and bits, ones and zeros in a computer, but you can't see the kind of the poem that's being written on the computer in the bits in the same way. It's a different kind of level of understanding.
Exactly, it's exactly that. And there are the systems piece operates in a couple of different ways. One, and this is why I found the 4-quadrant approach, which we kind of dubbed the adaptive capacity framework lately. What's important for organizations, and the really practical thing that people who are in positions of authority and responsibility need to get a handle on and benefit from, is the piece about it's all going on at the same time. And so mindset is happening in you and in other people. Behavior and skills and knowledge are there or not there. The culture is occurring, the behavioral norms are there, the power and the politics is happening, and the structure is there, the strategy is there, and the systems are there or not, all at the same time, and they're all influencing each other. And that's the thing, and that's the integration piece, and that's the systemic thinking or the systems thinking. It's like you have to be able to navigate all of this simultaneously, because that's actually the job. If you want to have an effective team or organization, the leadership of it needs to tackle all 4 of those things simultaneously and be able to do that at different levels. And that's the job.
Yeah. I think the way that I've heard this kind of approach is almost, you have the flux of everyday happenings, events, and so on. But all these are kind of entangled. You can't just separate them out as discrete pieces. I suppose you can for the purposes of understanding them, but you also need to understand that in real life they are entangled and they're all operating together, and a change in one affects the other. Mindset affects behavior, or behavior affects mindset, and so on.
Yes. And how you are doing things, somebody who's in a position of responsibility, as you're enacting change within systems or ways of working, if you send that memo, if you have that interaction with that person, you are changing things. You are influencing all the other bits. Yes. And so is everybody else.
So if we think about, a 4-box structure is something which is easy to understand to some extent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's within this kind of moving flux of complexity. For somebody who's trying to look at it, it's not always kind of, I guess, neat and obvious exactly what's kind of going on there.
Yeah.
So how does your approach, I guess, maybe just take a step back. In our last discussion, I think we talked about how you needed a leader to recognize that there was a problem here in order to invite you in to the discussion. There was so I think we went into some detail in our last discussion, and people can look at that on the Substack to say, well, before you intervene, what are the conditions? How do you create the conditions for intervention? And it seemed to come down very much to that leadership, that the person in power being able to see that something was required.
Yeah.
So I think, following on from that, then they've recognized it, recognize something's happening. How do you then, look at a situation? And I guess you make a decision as well, don't you, as to whether or not you should come in or not into that situation.
Yeah, look, and it's that dilemma of knowing when you can add as opposed to just add noise, I suppose. So I think if there's a leader in a system, an organization, a CEO, something like that, who recognizes there's some integration work to be done, they have a problem that they need to solve, there's that market opportunity, or there's a systems problem, there's lack of reliability, or the operating rhythm is out, or they've got to deal with disruption in their market or their environment somehow. I think the reason I put something like this to them, I would put them this map up front and kind of go, well, this is like, your problem will be all over this. You may think it's in system, but it's also in every other place as well. And so it's a integrated approach. And look, typically we would start probably with behavior. It's one that is easy for people to understand what it is. And it's something that is available to be measured and feedback about, and people can understand how they're behaving and how other people are behaving and how that's impacting both relationships, politics, effectiveness, how things get done. And it feels like it's a great place as well to start to enroll people into, there's actually something I might need to change about myself. And that kind of, what's my 50% of the problem here to be solved? Like, it's that adaptive thing again that Heifetz talks about, where I can't solve this problem by staying the same as who I am. I can't just apply expert knowledge. It's not what Cynefin would talk about as a simple or a complicated problem. It's a complex one, and I'm going to have to change myself in order to get to the right level of capacity to be able to do something different. So starting with behavior, typically then it kind of travels in a bit of a C. It goes to mindset, which typically underpins behavior. And then working with probably a team of people, that intact team, say the executive team or whatever it is, then you can start to move into talk about culture and relationships, behavioral norms, the stories and the symbols that they're creating and how they collaborate or how they don't. And then they can start to work on something substantive in either the strategy or a structure or some systems of work that are actually presenting them problems. But it's almost like you need to get people literate enough about their own behavior and others, get them into a mindset to start to be able to work on that and talk about it, realize what the power and politics and how influence and norms need to change, so that they can finally have those kind of more honest and productive conversations about the organization. And the problem we see, and often why we get called in, is because they get someone like a McKinsey or somebody else who just goes straight to system and does it. They do a restructure, they get rid of a bunch of people, they go, right, going to now do the business process this way. And they only talk about system. They don't do anything with the other three, and it falls over. They walk out the door and the thing doesn't work. And so, usually we get called in to kind of fix those mistakes. And you have to get ready to do big system change. People have to be supported and challenged, but supported to be able to work differently.
So I think this again reminds me perhaps of something I reading about recently. If you look at the mindset, behavior, and culture aspects of things, and you come into a situation. So again, my own practice.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that I had to learn to kind of do intentionally. All of this stuff potentially is about sense making. It's kind of understanding what's kind of going on in the organization. And then when it comes to the implementation of the systems, strategy, structure sort of activity, it's almost like this is a process of sense giving. You have to go through the sense making aspect of what's going on in order to then come back and implement change. While a lot of people sort of come in and go, well, we're experts, we've done something somewhere else, it made sense to us there, or maybe we didn't wait to see if it made sense, we just did it and then we kind of moved on. So here's what you should focus on. Well, actually, this kind of sense making side of things, it's important, but many people don't know how to do it. So they don't consider it necessarily as part of the activity. So perhaps it's worth spending a bit of time about, well, if the McKinseys and so on of the world come in and they go straight for these actions, why is it they do that? Is that because senior managers want that kind of activity? Is it actually a question of what sort of drives a decision to go with someone like that? Because I think it's only about understanding why people go for that option that we can understand why they should go for something else and what's blocking them from doing that.
Look, I think there's a lot of different reasons why that happens, and the biases that exist around, what is business and what would I be if I were a good businessman? And a lot of the traditional education around, like whether it's an MBA or something like that, would have stayed very firmly in that lower right-hand quadrant. And they would assert that this is what business is. It's about structure, it's about systems of work, it's about strategy formation. And so those things have that kind of cachet. And certainly all of the education and all of the preferences, the intellectual and emotional kind of preferences that a lot of those people have would be to the tangible side. And they want things that are simple, and they want things that seem straightforward. And so that biases a lot of that activity to trying to treat an organization and business activity as a thing. And so it's a reification of what is essentially a social process into some notion of a tangible object. And so that biases all of that activity down to that, certainly the right-hand side and the lower bits of the right-hand side. I think there's the intangible side around mindset. I have run in many, many times people just say that's not allowed here. Like, it's not appropriate. Don't bring that stuff in. It's not, leave that at home. Like, that's something for you to do in your private life. Keep that. That doesn't belong in business. And I think that was, and there's legal reasons and all sorts of kind of rationalizations about why that's the case. Unfortunately, it's just a fantasy. It's just not true. I mean, people bring themselves to work every second of every day. Whether they're hiding it or not, or whether they're wearing some kind of mask or not, is fine. But don't pretend like they're not there. So the culture piece, I think it gets a bit of lip service, but no one really knows what to do about it. No one knows how to define it. No one knows. They don't have a skill set, and they feel uncomfortable. You know, it's messy because you're dealing with people and emotions and kind of irrationality and politics, and it gets all a bit icky, and I think people feel out of their depth. And so to steer away from the stuff, particularly on the left hand side, um, feels like it's more of an emotional reaction, albeit dressed up as a bit of a rational decision.
So again, I think that's really interesting because it fits into some of the stuff I've been looking at recently around, that term reification. So if we have business and we think of business in terms of things, and we try and make, people sort of even look at things like business plans. It's a thing. It's a pitch deck. It's this creation. They forget, I suppose, that actually there is a story. There's a narrative. There's this, and the 3 out of those 4 aspects of what you've talked about in the ACI are actually the narrative aspects of the stories we tell each other about why we're here and what we're doing. And this again links to something just recently around, the way people approach AI. They see it as a technology that means you can replace people, as opposed to how technology is typically used in practice, which is people use technology to do more things that they want to do. So it goes back to, what's the story? Do you want to use a sword for fighting, or do you want to turn to plowshare? What are you trying to do with these approaches?
Look, and further to that, and just this idea of the reification piece, AI itself, even in the label we've put on it, is a reification itself, right? So artificial intelligence, it's not intelligence. It's certainly artificial, but it's not intelligence, and so this idea of, what are we talking about? What is it? I think everyone's gotten very caught up in this idea, well, I can produce the document. I can get AI to produce the document, and then we're done. We've got it because it's the document. And it's like, no, that's not the point of the exercise at all. It's not the document. You want people to understand the strategy and to have a story and to be motivated to achieve it and to act and make a decision. It's not the document. The document's irrelevant. In fact, it's probably already out of date. And so this idea of this is actually about all of an organization is a social process. It is an in time, ongoing thing, evolving, and people just look at it and go, no, it's an office building, it's a set of documents, it's a balance sheet, it's all these things. And yeah, I think that's part of the root of the evil there.
You kind of miss the big reality for the little stuff. And I've always thought about this in terms of my own learning and in terms of technology. As a technology, kind of think it's the things that matter, and everything else is actually quite little and doesn't really make much of a difference. And really, with organizations, you can realize that most of it is about these stories and people, and the things are the easiest part to sort out. It's very easy to implement an AI system into an organization. It's much more difficult to actually lead it to go from the stories people have in their heads to the actions they take to improve things and make things better. This is just a small little piece of the overall puzzle that they're trying to work with.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
So again, if we go back to the focus here of the actual kind of ACI approach.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we talked about leaders recognizing that something needs to change. That something within this flux is problematic. How do people respond? So the individuals who are then affected by the process, quite often, I find, in my experience, doing change work with organizations, some people are already doing change because they're pushing against the existing boundaries. You have this idea of entrepreneurial people, people who push, who will do things regardless of the existing constraints that they have, and they push against them, while others feel very safe within their constraints, and they feel unsafe if the existing rules and norms and methods and approaches are sort of changed. So when you sort of go into somebody and go, well, we need to work on your behaviors, some people will be up for it, some people will find that quite threatening. How does that work in practice when you start to engage with the individuals who might be affected by the kind of program that you're putting in?
I think it depends is the short answer. Depends who they are and where they are in in relation to the status quo. And so there's a whole bunch of people. All right, so let's say it's an operating environment, a plant, a shop, or whatever, and there's lack of stability in how the process, whatever it is happening. Now, usually that's not a good thing. Usually that vacillation or lots of variability within that is generally not a good thing. So if that's the problem to be solved, well, a bunch of people will already be starting to do something about it, and they will have some idea around what's wrong. And they may be getting heard, and they may not be getting heard. They may be getting support. They may not be getting support. There's other people who will be benefiting from the situation as it is, and they won't see that there's a problem particularly. For whatever reason, those people would, not be too happy about the idea that this thing that they like, for whatever reason, is maybe now under threat. So I think, again, that lower left-hand culture quadrant is about that. Well, that's kind of where politics and power live, and so usually people's reaction and response to something is going to change around here is going to be a political one, and it has to do with their power or lack of power and how they are in relation to those two things. So that's usually how it plays out.
So, okay, I think now that we've kind of looked at those aspects, the next kind of question, the next kind of direction my thinking is going in is, we've got the matrix, and you've got the ACI approach. So is the first step sort of measuring where people are currently so that you can see where they might be at the end of intervention? Is that usually the starting points before,
Yeah, look, there is it. So I like what you said before around sense making, and so there is a sense making, and lots of people talk about a diagnostic, or they talk about a discovery, going in, try and find out what's going on.
Yeah.
And there are multiple perspectives, right? So everyone's going to have a slightly different story about what's going on here and what needs to change or not change, what's important, what's not important, what's good, what's bad. And the idea of, well, how are we going to collect all those perspectives? How are we going to coordinate those? And how are we going to figure out what's important, sort it out? So yes, the ACI is a measurement of the ACF. So this 4-quadrant thing that we've got, the cross within the environment. Well, the ACI is a way of collecting people's perspectives on that across all of those 4 quadrants. And it provides the opportunity for people to have a structured conversation about what they think is going on, how that's the same or different from what their colleagues think is going on, being able to talk about where they are in agreement and where they think it's going well, where they're in agreement, they think it's going poorly, where they're in disagreement. Some think it's going okay, some think it's not going okay, and about all of the different stuff across all the 4 quadrants. And so it's not a measurement of the truth. It is a way of revealing different perspectives on what's going on across all of that mindset, behavior, culture, and system. So it provides that opportunity for sense making.
So that's something I need to remember, because I think you mentioned the work of Weick before. Weick, I'm not sure how you say it, but I was reading one of his papers, and it made this point about sense making around it's not about the truth. It is about the story and a plausible story. And it is the question you're asking is what's going on here, so we can then address the question of what should we do next. And there is this. So I think there's a little bit in there perhaps about maybe how that connects to what you're saying around. We're not looking for the truth. We're looking for what's going on here. What's the story about the present? But I also think that's really interesting set up for our next discussion potentially as we're going 30 minutes. But if you could just kind of maybe go on.
Well, no, 100%. So I love Wyke, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but Wick something. Anyway, that guy, I love what he does around sense making piece, and that as being fundamental, if not almost the entirety of what an organization is. And so there's a lot of, and this goes back to the reification thing, and people getting so caught up in it and so caught up in the notion of a thing and data driven and analytics, and we're getting at the truth. It's like, no, you're not. You're just asking particular questions, which is just telling a particular story. And so the recognition that every bit of data and analytics and stuff that's coming out of organizations, it's all just a fiction. It's all just a story. It just depends on what question you ask as to what number you generate. So it is very much about getting people connected enough so that they can have the right level of conversation and make sense of what's important, and therefore what should we do. That's the whole point.
I think that's a great point. We should stop this particular discussion. We've gone about 30 minutes now. But in the next one, I think what we're really interested to do is pick up on this particular thing. But how do we go and understand what's the story? And that can be the focus of our next chat, potentially.
Yeah, okay, great. Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again.
Thanks. End recording.